Hi everyone, welcome to week 11. This week we are going to be doing our first peer review for our debunking a conspiracy theory paper. And for this peer review, we're just doing kind of the first section of the paper, which is going to be a draft of your introduction paragraph and of your two summaries. And so hopefully at this point, you've been able to get a good sense of each of the sides of this debate, right? And you can represent those. And so you'll be able to get some feedback on if that's coming through without a ton of bias. You can make sure that it's clear what each side is saying. We'll get some feedback from peer review on that. And then also for your introduction paragraph, just remember, I'm looking for, keep it simple, a hook of some kind, something to tell us why this is a relevant topic, some background information, and remember, keep it very simple because we're about to go into more depth with the background information in our summary paragraphs, and then a thesis statement. And I would recommend for the thesis statement, starting with some sort of middle ground that you can find between the conspiracy theorists and the official sources, right? So for example, I said here, scientists discover 18,000 new species every year on average, meaning there are still many undiscovered species on Earth. However, as of yet, there is no credible evidence that the Loch Ness Monster is real. So you are not saying it's impossible, but you are saying it's actually a very unlikely conspiracy theory, right? So that's kind of the tactic you want to try. Make sure you're qualifying the argument. You can't prove something's impossible. And also, you want to try and be as respectful as possible with the way that you're presenting your argument. Okay, so feedback for that will be due on the 7th. Hopefully, this will be really helpful to you to make sure everything's working so far before you move into your rebuttal. And your rebuttal paragraph is going to be due on the 9th. So this is going to be we're really moving into the next section of the paper, kind of the meat of this essay, the central goal of this essay, which is to prove that this conspiracy theory is unlikely, right? And so I've given you some suggestions of different angles that you could take here. You can talk about facts, right? How you could talk about definitions, you could talk about timelines. I would really recommend, if you are going to be talking about facts, that you are finding the best sources possible for those facts. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted you to make sure that you were looking at primary sources, because people who are going to be skeptical, you want to make sure that you are presenting them the best evidence if you're presenting it from a facts angle, right? Because they have facts of their own. And so your best argument is going to be when you have quality facts that you're using, or quality sources that you're using, I mean. But I also want you to consider some other angles that you can use for the debunking, okay? Because people who believe in conspiracy theories know the facts. They've heard both sides, okay? And so I want you to talk a little bit more about context. Why do people distrust what authorities have said regarding whatever the conspiracy theory is, right? So why do people distrust that JFK, his assassination was this one guy, right? There are reasons that people distrust the government, especially at that time period, right? And that reasons that continue through the current time, right? And so that would be one angle. You could talk about cognitive bias, right? What is it about our brains that makes this type of argument more persuasive, or that makes this type of evidence seem compelling? You can also talk about logical fallacies, right? So what is it about the argument that's actually, it might sound really compelling and interesting, but there's actually a problem with the argument itself, right? And so these are a few different ways that you can approach this topic that will hopefully catch people, give them a little bit of new information, right? Rather than just telling them the facts, which they're probably fairly familiar with. You're going to try to find a new angle that might surprise them and make them reconsider. Okay, and then finally, I just want to encourage you to make sure that you're using the paragraph structure that we've talked about, especially with the contextual analysis. So think about using a topic sentence. What is this paragraph about? Evidence, just literally tell us a quote, a fact, etc. Analysis, this is where you're going to interpret that fact or that quote for us and tell us what is the significance of it? Why does it prove your topic sentence is true? And then your transition, which again, I always try to tell people, don't overthink it. Why does this paragraph connect to the next paragraph? Why are you going to move on, or, instead of just staying in the same paragraph? So usually you're adding a new point. You're going to talk about the counter argument instead. You're going to move on to a new piece of evidence supporting the same point. So there's different types of reasons that we need to start a new paragraph. And so we can always talk more about that if you want, but that is usually what we're doing with the transition, right? So that's it for this week. Well, I guess we do also have our presentation discussion board. This is a continuing one though. So this should look very familiar We have some very interesting ones, both involving JFK in some ways. And so please let me know if you have any questions. Good luck with your writing this week, and I will see you next week.